Welcome to Rex Factor!
This week, Æthelwold. With your hosts, Graham Duke and Ali Hood.
Hello!
Hello.
And welcome to Rex Factor, reviewing all the nearly monarchs of England from Æthelwold to Albert Victor, the people who could or should have become a monarch only for fate to intervene. And we are now beginning the series. We had our introductory episode, we had our chat with Emily, but Æthelwold is the opening proper review episode of the series.
Fate is always death, isn't it, in this instance?
No, not necessarily. There are some who try and fail to become the monarch and just go away.
Really? Well,
Pack their bags and say, oh, well, never mind. But in most cases, yes, fate is death.
yeah.
Now, if you want to hear a little bit more about us, head to rexfactor.podcast.com. You get links to all of our social media sites and, indeed, more information about the podcast. And if you want to hear more of us, you can sign up on patreon.com/rexfactor and you get an ad-free version of the main podcast, over 450 bonus episodes, plus access to our Discord server.
Do it.
And you can also now watch us on Spotify and YouTube. So the whole of Series 4, the main podcast, will be on video.
Not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah. So, Æthelwold today. Now, people might be familiar with him if you've seen or read the Bernard Cornwell books or TV series Last Kingdom. He's a major recurring character in that, the disaffected nephew of Alfred the Great and a rival for the throne of Edward the Elder.
Does anyone like that?
A lot of people liked it. It was around for quite a while.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
So probably not going to be foremost in Ali's mind, but nevertheless, we're going to be looking at just how good was Æthelwold's claim to the throne and how close did he come to securing it.
I mean, he doesn't... Who's this guy?
So that is, they had photos in that time. No, that's the actor who played him in Last Kingdom.
He looks like such an actor. Look at that sideways smirk. What's going on there? Is that him being Tom Kerridge the actor, or him being Æthelwold?
Is that him being the TV chef actor, Tom?
I was trying to make up a name. He looks like a Tom. What?
I think he's a Harry.
What, is that him being Harry or being Æthelwold?
It's him being Æthelwold.
Okay, well, I don't like the cut of his jib.
Yes, we'll see. The Last Kingdom version of Æthelwold, they've got an interpretation of him, which I think is a valid one, but it's interesting to consider, is that just the kind of official Alfredian Æthelwold, but is there a different one that they'd rather us not know about?
Okay.
Let's find out.
Biography.
Æthelwold was born in roughly 868, the son of King Æthelred I, not that one, and Wulfrith. Also know that one, but you're probably not remembering that one.
Wolverhampton.
No, it was Wulfrith. So not Æthelred the Unready. Instead, Æthelred I is an older brother of Alfred the Great, or rather one of 4 elder brothers of
And was
Alfred
king.
the Great, and was king. So we're in the Anglo-Saxon period, and it's the time before there is actually an England. So instead we've got a series of smaller kingdoms. Now, Æthelwold's great-grandfather, Egbert, had emerged from the shadow of Offa of Mercia, episode that people might have heard that we did not too long ago, to conquer Kent, Surrey, Sussex and Essex, and establishes his kingdom, Wessex, as the predominant power in the island. Now, with the older brothers all being quite short-lived and childless, Æthelred, so Æthelwold's father, becomes king in 865, and that's rather unfortunate because it's exactly at the same time that the Great Heathen Army, so a large Viking army aiming at conquest, heads for England.
Right.
By 870, Wessex is the only English kingdom still fully intact and independent.
Right.
So, together with his younger brother Alfred, Æthelred fights 4 inconclusive battles in the space of a month,
Yeah.
870 into 871, and then during a subsequent lull in hostilities, Æthelred and Alfred try to clarify their wills and the succession to ensure that the kingdom won't be weakened in the event of one of them dying and there being legal disputes about what's happening when they're in the midst of war. Now, at this point, both have young children. So Æthelred has 2 sons, obviously Æthelwold, and also, it seems, an older brother, Æthelhelm, Alfred at this point only has a daughter, Æthelfled.
What's with Ethel?
It's the name.
But they can't all be called this, because maybe the nickname is the last bit of the word. So instead of him being called... No one would call him Æthelwold the whole time.
Woldy.
Yeah, it'd be Wold, and what was the other one? Ethel...
Helm.
Wold, Helm, and...
Fled.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at the moment we've got 2 sons for Ethelred, just a daughter for Alfred, but he might have sons later on. Alfred is indeed, obviously he does. But the Saxons don't follow strict primogeniture. So the priority is to have an adult king who can lead armies in battle, particularly obviously at a time like this when you've got the Vikings trying to conquer you. So Alfred will be his brother's heir. Even though his brother has got sons, they will want Alfred to succeed because they need a king who can lead the troops in battle.
Yeah.
So to ensure that they've got all the lands at their disposal, the new king, they agree that whichever brother dies first, they will grant all the lands to the surviving brother.
Right.
So they won't split it up and give it some to their sons and some to whoever. The king will inherit everything, so he's got the full resources he needs
To fight.
to fight the Vikings, exactly. Now, this effectively gives either brother free license to virtually disinherit the other's children, barring the assurances of some territorial possessions that is sort of personally owned by the person rather than the office of the crown.
Yeah. So it's completely one of them has to completely give up the claim line.
That's the long term. The short term priority is obviously just making sure they survive, because realistically there's a very strong possibility that one or both of them will be killed in the next, well, potentially the next week, with the battles coming. So they really just have to make some kind of provision that says this will just continue. If one of us dies, we can just keep going just to survive. But indeed, after that, we'll see it then gets a little trickier. And indeed, it's just a couple of months after the Witan, a sort of high council of Saxon nobles, agree to the deal at a place called Swinbjorg, that Æthelred, the older brother, dies, probably in wounds from a battle fought a month earlier. So Æthelred dies, and indeed, Alfred becomes king. Unopposed, it's successful, and indeed Alfred is ultimately able to defeat the Vikings, so effectively ultimately splits England up. So the Vikings rule what's called the Danelaws, so that's the east and the north of what is now England. Alfred rules the rest, sort of the south and the west. But Alfred does have a vision of uniting all the English peoples under one kingdom, so that's the long-term goal that we're now moving towards. But with the urgency of the Viking threat now substantially reduced, Alfred has to make suitable accommodation for his nephews. But it appears that this will be a source of tension throughout his reign. So Alfred does now have a son, Edward, who becomes known later as Edward the Elder, and he's born a few years after the agreement at Swinbjorg, probably in about 874.
Where's Swinbjorg? Please say Swindon.
I don't think we know. I mean, it's not impossible it's that sort of area, but I think it's just one of those place names they've not actually been able to find.
Probably the name of a farm or something in the middle of nowhere.
And it becomes very clear from the off that Alfred intends Edward to succeed him. So Alfred wants the line of succession to just go through father to son, which to us, obviously, we expect primogeniture. That seems entirely standard and regular. But for contemporaries, it's much less cut and dried. So it seems the older brother Ethelhelm disappears from the records in the 880s at some point, so presumably he dies young. So we've got Æthelwold, and many people will see Æthelwold as the natural heir rather than Edward.
Right.
Now, the throne can be claimed by anyone with the status of being an Ætheling, other Ethel. So that literally means nobly born, but by the 9th century it's pretty much exclusively taken to mean the son of a king, and therefore worthy of the throne.
Right.
And this obviously applies to both Edward and Æthelwold. Both of their fathers were kings.
Yeah.
Edward's father is the king, but Æthelwold's father was the
Dead king.
The dead king. And indeed, Æthelwold is nearly a decade older than Edward. He's the son of the older brother, i.e. the senior brother. Thus, he might be viewed as the senior Ætheling.
Gosh, that's odd, isn't it? Because you think at a time of great emergency... Oh, no, they did do that.
Well, that's the thing. At a time of great emergency,
it doesn't
absolutely
matter.
fine that it goes to Alfred, but after that, Ethel was like, well, it should be me next, shouldn't it? But Alfred doesn't want it to go like that.
But that's the bit. They stumble on some logic, as in careering towards a meritocracy when the chips are down. And as soon as the chips are picked back up, they're like, I was born first. That's more important.
But, the flip side of this is there could come a point where, if Alfred dies, youngish, we could have Æthelwold at 20 and Edward at 10. And almost certainly Æthelwold would be the one that they move to. But Alfred very much is like, no, family line, my line.
Yeah.
I want to ensure this happens. So Æthelwold for many people will be seen as the senior Ætheling. Indeed, there's a charter in the 890s which lists him immediately above Edward. And usually the order in which they witness is taken to imply seniority, so that does imply seniority to Æthelwold. Now, in our previous series on the consorts, we discussed how Wessex had this antipathy towards crowned queens.
Yeah.
They really don't like it, and Alfred particularly apparently seemed to be dead set against it. But interestingly, Æthelwold's mother had witnessed a charter as Regina. As queen. So was part of Alfred's opposition because he knew that Æthelwold might otherwise say, well, my mum was a queen and Edward's mum was just plain Elswith.
It's all, okay. They're all just vying for position here.
But Alfred is putting all these things in place to try and undermine Æthelwold's case. But actually, Æthelwold's got quite a lot of things in his favour. Much more of a legitimate claimant than Alfred would want us to believe.
But all it comes down to is who's got the biggest, sharpest swords. Well, go on then, what's he up to?
Well, despite Alfred's success as king, this is an issue that doesn't go away. It's there throughout his reign. So Æthelwold has powerful supporters at court. So his maternal uncle, a chap called Wulfhere, was removed as earldoman of Wiltshire for deserting Alfred after the Viking ambush in 878 that saw Alfred forced to seek refuge in the marshes of Athelney.
Right.
And Barbara York believes that probably Wulfhere, thinking that Alfred might be done for and not coming back, maybe he tries to come to an accommodation with the Vikings and suggests that they install Æthelwold as a sort of puppet king, which is something they've done in other kingdoms. So he's maybe thinking, here's a chance, get Æthelwold on the throne.
And say it's puppet, but then actually kick them out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By the mid-880s, Æthelwold and his brother are on the verge of manhood, and they seem to have become figureheads for opposition to Alfred. And Alfred is forced to call a meeting of the Witan at a place called Langendine, following criticism that he was withholding territory from his nephews.
Right.
That he should have given them. And later in Alfred's will, he recalls the discussion. So I've got a big quote here, but I think it's very on the money.
That's weird language for a will, isn't it? To have, quote in it?
Well, no, I'm going to quote the will.
Oh, right. I thought it was saying, and anyway, he told me.
And as Shakespeare says, will say. So this is what Alfred says, his recollections. When we now heard many disputes about the inheritance, I brought King Æthelwulf's will, that's his father, to our assembly at Langendine, and it was read before all the councillors of the West Saxons. When it had been read, I urged them all, and gave them my pledge that I would never bear a grudge against any one of them because they declared what was right, that none of them would hesitate either for love or fear of me to expound the common law, lest any man should say that I treated my young kinsman wrongfully, the older or the younger. And then they all pronounced what was right, and said that they could not conceive any juster title, nor could they find one in the will. And then, quote, now everything therein has come into your possession, so you may bequeath it and give it into the hand of kinsman or stranger, whichever you prefer.
Guys, really, that's watertight there, isn't it? It's mine. I can do what I like.
In other words, we all agreed that I was right and could do whatever I like.
Yeah.
Richard Abels has considered Alfred's justifications rather tendentious, but at this point, Alfred is at the height of his powers, so the fact that he's having to deal with this at all tells us he has been placed under a certain amount of pressure, and that there is obviously a strong level of support there for Æthelwold, that even once he's defeated the Vikings, Alfred's still having to go up before everyone and justify himself.
Yeah, and address it.
Yeah. So Alfred therefore goes to great lengths to ensure that Edward will succeed him. So he makes sure that future appointments to the Witan, who will ultimately determine the succession, are men that are loyal to him and thus loyal to Edward. So by the time it gets to it, hopefully he thinks Æthelwold won't have anybody who's speaking up for him anymore. It's around this time that Alfred commissions the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is kind of official history.
Oh.
So obviously he's trying to magnify his own achievements, but perhaps he's also, though, enshrining this notion of the patrilineal succession.
Yeah.
And the correct order and the correct line and that sort of thing. Because Alfred is a bit of a dab hand at PR, so we've seen I think on our interview with David Woodman, how he played down the role of Mercia in the role of some of his victories against the Vikings. There were stories about his brother, Æthelred, Æthelwold's father, apparently being too busy praying to join in the Battle of Ashdown, leaving Alfred to win the day.
That sounds like something Alfred would do.
It does sound like something Alfred would do, and you wonder whether it's very much written in this context in which Alfred is trying to embellish his own record and perhaps tone down that of his brother, because that's Æthelwold's father. So just subtle little things that he's doing. When Alfred makes his own will, the one that we quoted earlier, the vast bulk of his properties do go to Edward, and he does the absolute bare minimum for Æthelwold. So he just gets 3 territories, what's known as Bookland properties. So basically those are ones that Æthelred, his father, had owned independently rather than as the king. So Alfred has to give him those lands. He doesn't give him anything else. So all Æthelwold gets is Godalming and Guildford in Surrey, and Steyning in Sussex. Now Steyning's an interesting one because that was the burial place of Alfred's father, which would be quite a significant place to have. It's quite symbolic to have the graves of dynastic figures. To avoid his nephew getting such a symbolic site, Alfred has his father reburied in Winchester.
That's practical.
It is practical. It's a useful place to have him. But again, it's interesting where he's like, he's got to have that land, but my dad's in that land.
Let's hoik him out.
Yeah, exactly. Alfred increasingly involves Edward in royal governance so that he will be seen as a kingly figure. From 892, he witnesses 6 charters compared to just 1 for Æthelwold. And he's noted by Asser as frequently accompanying Alfred whenever they travel across the country. And then with the resurgence of Viking attacks in 892, Edward is given independent military commands.
Right. Okay.
Alfred even invests his grandson, Athelstan, in a public ceremony. And Athelstan's about 5 years old, which again perhaps is to symbolise this sense of a fixed dynastic line. So even going beyond Edward, you've already seen, well, after Edward, obviously, we've said it's going to be Athelstan. So really trying to write out Æthelwold from anybody's thoughts. So a charter of 898 even gives Edward the title of Rex. So this is still when Alfred is alive. So Alfred is Rex Saxonum, king of the Saxons. Edward is Rex, which perhaps implies almost like a form of kingship.
Yeah.
So Edward is effectively already acknowledged king.
Yeah, wow. Co-king job.
So indeed, when Alfred dies in 899, Edward does become king and doesn't seem to have been something that the Witan challenged in any way. But, as expected, he does face opposition from his cousin.
This fella,
Æthelwold. So Æthelwold gathers his supporters and seizes the royal manor of Twynham, which is now Christchurch in Dorset, and then the strategically significant Wimborne in Dorset. And then along his travels to Wimborne, he acquires a wife.
we found one.
Indeed.
On the side of the road. Because that's how they get them a lot of the time.
Well, not in this case, because it's the Saxons. So the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle states that what he actually did was abduct a nun.
Yes!
Early doors.
Brilliant. First step, sex with nuns.
Now, this is a source heavily biased in Edward's favour, so almost certainly the unnamed nun would have been of noble birth, and the marriage would have been a means for Æthelwold to broaden his support within Wessex. So he's not just kidnapped a random nun, because that's its habit. It will be someone important.
That he's just whipped out of school and said, you know.
Can be queen.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he's got these towns, he's got a bride, so Æthelwold sets himself up in preparation for a standoff with Edward. Edward, of course, responds immediately, so he brings a large army to an ancient hill fort about 4 miles northwest of Wimborne called Bradbury Rings, which is still there, and then readies for battle. But Æthelwold refuses to come out, barricades himself inside, and declares that this will be the location of his last stand.
Nice.
Instead, though, he actually slips out during the night and leaves his wife behind.
Oh.
But he's not finished.
Hang on, he was in the concentric rings.
Edward is in the concentric rings,
Yeah.
But a few miles away from where Æthelwold is barricaded inside a town.
Who's Edward?
Edward the Elder, who's Alfred's son, is now king.
Yeah.
So Æthelwold slips out during the night, leaves his wife behind, but he isn't finished. He's obviously failed to get enough support within Wessex, which you assume is because of all the stuff that Alfred was doing.
Yeah.
To make sure Edward was unopposed. So instead, Æthelwold seeks alliances elsewhere.
Française.
Not Francaise. He rides north to Viking Northumbria,
Oh, no.
where the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells us they received him as their king and submitted to him.
What? No, they didn't. The Vikings?
The Vikings in Northumbria.
No, they didn't.
Now, this obviously represents a much more serious challenge to Edward, because the initial rebellion was kind of an internal thing going on. Now it's been escalated. It's not just a dynastic challenge, it's potential full-scale national war with the national enemy.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of debate amongst historians as to exactly how Æthelwold was viewed by the Vikings. Was he genuinely seen as their king?
No.
Was he just acknowledged as King of Wessex?
That's helpful to them if they can.
Did they see him as a puppet king, or is he actually a genuine leader that commands respect?
I mean, but no one thinks that, do they?
Well, we'll see. The continuation of his journey suggests this is a man who is able to get quite a lot of people fighting for him.
Okay.
We will assess it more in Battleyness, but nevertheless, things go quiet for about a year or so. But about 901, 902, Æthelwold has drummed up enough support, presumably from Northumbria, to resume his bid for the throne of Wessex. So the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records, "This year came Æthelwold hither over sea with all the fleet that he could get, and he was submitted to in Essex."
Oh.
Now, it's not clear whether he just sails down the east coast from Northumbria, or if perhaps he actually may have even gone to Denmark,
right.
got some troops, and come back again. So we don't know exactly. But nevertheless, he's got a fleet, he's got troops, and he makes a good enough impression because he'd previously got the submission of people in York, and then he comes to Essex, and he also gets submission.
Do we know where he landed?
We don't know exactly where he landed. Now, Essex at this point is predominantly English in population, but it's not very close politically to Wessex, so it's kind of a buffer zone between Wessex and the Vikings of East Anglia.
Oh, right.
So it's, again, quite a loss for Edward that Essex had turned. And indeed, soon after this, the Viking leaders in East Anglia submit to Æthelwold as well.
Right.
And then after that, they go off onto the offensive. So they raid into English Mercia as far as the Thames, cross over at an ancient fort at Cricklade, and then go into Wessex itself, plunder around Braden and northern Wessex before heading back towards East Anglia.
Well, I never.
Edward, again, of course, has to take action in response to this, so he launches a counter-raid across East Anglia, but he doesn't seem to have wanted to have engaged Æthelwold in open battle, so orders his various armies to withdraw.
Right.
Now, obviously, most of the forces obey his summonses, but unfortunately, one army did not, as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle relates. "Being desirous of returning thence, he issued an order through the whole army that they should all go out at once. But the Kentish men remained behind, contrary to his order, though he had sent 7 messengers to them."
Uh-oh.
So, for some reason, the Kent army
Up for a
ignores
scrap,
his order
yeah.
and just they stay out there. So we don't know, was Edward's authority waning outside of Wessex under the pressure of Æthelwold? Did the Kentish leaders disagree with Edward's reluctance to engage in battle?
Yeah.
We don't know, but regardless, as a result, they are caught up and surrounded by Æthelwold's forces, and we have the Battle of the Holm. And it is almost as disastrous as Edward could have feared. The men of Kent lose 2 ealdormen, one of Edward's thanes, and an abbot.
Oh, God. Where'd you get them? Where are you going to pick
Got
another one of
mixed
those up?
in them, exactly. And the Vikings hold the field, i.e. they win the battle.
Okay.
Almost
Well,
as
Æthelwold
disastrous.
wins the battle.
Well, yes and no.
Right.
It's almost as disastrous as Edward could have feared, except that despite the winnings, with the Vikings winning the battle, they suffer the loss of several earls, a Mercian prince that was in the army, the Danish king of East Anglia, and, most importantly, Æthelwold himself.
Oh, so when that's almost a victory for the Kentish.
Yes, except that they lose.
They
so it's this
lose.
weird situation. Yes, they lose the battle, but all the key leaders on the other side are killed.
It's a Jutland gig, isn't it? Who won?
Yeah,
I think Alfred won overall. No, who do I mean?
Edward.
Yeah.
Well, yes. So, I mean, ultimately, despite losing the battle, the upshot for Edward, of course, is that Æthelwold has been killed and his revolt is over.
Yeah.
But it's a close run thing, as I said. They win the battle, And Edward's authority, had they won the battle and had all those leaders surviving, with Edward having failed to bring the men of Kent back in, having not wanted to fight Æthelwold, perhaps because it's quite a notable army, he potentially was in a bit of trouble there.
Golly. Yeah.
But, as it is, Æthelwold is killed.
Job done.
And job is done. So that is the life and non-reign of Æthelwold. We shall now move on to review him after a quick break.
Battleyness!
Well, Æthelwold's revolt was a very serious political and military threat to Edward the Elder. And Æthelwold demonstrated an impressive ability to muster a broad sweep of allies. So obviously soon after his accession, he's initially just focused within Wessex, so he took those towns of Twynham and Wimborne. Wimborne was of particular strategic value because of its location. It commands a number of different roads and crosses a couple of rivers. But it's also very symbolic for its association in Wessex's history, particularly because it is the burial site of his own father.
Yeah.
Because we saw how Alfred moved his father away from a territory that Æthelwold owned, so that Æthelwold didn't get his grave. But Wimborne is where Æthelwold's father is.
Right.
So he takes that town. That's a very symbolic declaration of a dynastic.
Right. Oh, I see.
there.
Yeah.
So it's strategically good militarily, but also symbolism, the dynasty, etc.
This is what you do when you have a dynasty.
Yeah. Æthelwold, obviously stressing his own regal heritage and maybe even establishing a different centre of power in Wessex. It is kind of from a different part of Wessex. So, it may even be that he had an idea of splitting the kingdom. We don't quite know. But certainly he was establishing a power source somewhere else away from Winchester. Now, it's also notable that Edward isn't crowned until Æthelwold leaves Wimborne.
Sorry, say that again.
So Edward the Elder became king in 899 after Edward died, but he isn't crowned until 900 after Æthelwold had been forced to leave Wessex.
Right.
So again, that just suggests that Edward is not really fully secure on the throne at this point.
Yeah.
It's very much contested, and the fact that he has to wait for the coronation implies...
What does that terrible BBC programme make of all this? Do they show all this?
Yes, that is in there. Æthelwold's Revolt is in that. It's Netflix at the point at which it gets to Æthelwold's Revolt. But yes, no, Æthelwold's Revolt is in there. Now, Æthelwold's Revolt in that, Æthelwold's character, he's, as you saw from the picture, a bit of a Weasley sort of figure, a bit cowardly. He is quite manipulative, but in that one, he's very much the useful idiot for the Vikings.
Yeah.
He's not commanding them, he's not in charge, but they see the value of having a Saxon prince because of what he is rather than really who he is.
That's where I was going when that's where my gut suggests.
But it's interesting because that would be very much what Alfred and Edward in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle would want you to think.
Right.
Let's dismiss the value of this person. But as I said, he's doing an awful lot of getting people who don't respect him to nevertheless kind of
use him
and do what he wants them to do.
Yeah. I just... for him to have been crowned or acknowledged as King of the Vikings...
Well, it's not King of all Vikings, so it's specifically in York.
Right, as their leader or something.
Yeah, than all of them. Anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. So firstly, just the Wimborne bit. It's interesting that we've kind of got two phases to the revolt. So Ryan Lavelle is highlighted. We've got the legitimate challenge within Wessex, and at that point he's referred to as Æthelwold Ætheling, Throatworthy. He's never referred to as Ætheling again after that. Once he goes off to the Vikings, it's a different thing. But again, that does sort of imply that he's absolutely seen as being with the Vikings. It's not just this sort of errant princes over there. It does imply that he's turned.
Yeah.
But it's in the second phase when he's probably more of a threat, because that's the Vikings in and of themselves is a threat to Edward, but it also suggests that Æthelwold can command more support. So Northumbria, York, the Danes submitting to him, recognised as king. To what extent is he actually ruling? Very much debatable, but there is evidence that he mints coins in York. So I think it's like the Alwaldus, that's what it says on it, but that's very pretty close to Æthelwold's name. There's also Norse sagas that record the brief rule of a chap called King Canute, not that one, in about 900, who is initially repulsed north of Cleveland by an English king called Adelbright, which again you can see is could be a corruption for the Norse sagas to actually be Æthelwold.
Yeah.
So we've got a Norse saga that potentially might be referencing an Æthelwold being king. We've got coins being minted in York, and we've got versions of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle saying that he is
worthy. Like king worthy.
But accepted as king in York. Now, as I said, whether they actually think that he is their king, whether there's probably not a coronation ceremony. He probably doesn't necessarily even really think of ruling Northumbria. It's more that he comes in, he is of a certain status, they acknowledge that status, and then he goes about raising troops and heads off. He's never planning to remain in York and be the king there.
Right.
So it's perhaps a slightly different way of viewing it to how we might view it to Wessex, but there is evidence to suggest that he has some genuine power there. Now, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle has always tried to play down Æthelwold, but as I said, it is very much biased towards Alfred and towards Edward, and the fact that they mention the revolt at all indicates the fact that it must be a serious threat. But also we do have an incredible range of support from Æthelwold here. So we've got Northumbria, we've got Essex, we've got East Anglia, a fleet which, you know, may have gone to Denmark to get troops, we don't quite know. There's also probably a Mercian prince in his army as well, who's maybe hoping to get back into the mix. So you've got almost all of England, apart from Wessex, in a funny way, kind of involved in this rebellion. The Annals of St. Neots described Æthelwold at this time as Rex Paganorum, king of the pagans, and also Rex Danorum, king of the Danes. In both cases probably intended as a negative, but also maybe again reflects the level of support that he's got.
Yeah, definitely. The fact that they're mentioning him shows you the threat.
Yeah. Martin Ryan, the historians, argue that Æthelwold has a claim at this point to be the most powerful ruler in England, and that perhaps the fact that Edward didn't want to fight him when he ordered the troops to withdraw, maybe that's understandable if Edward's got Northumbrians, East Anglians, Essex, Mercians, etc.
So the Kentish folk did him a real solid.
They did, yeah. Maybe not on purpose, but nevertheless.
Yeah.
Likewise, Janet Nelson has concluded that in the eyes of many Englishmen as well as Scandinavians, this Ætheling had claims stronger than Edward's own. And it also shows the fragility of the sort of Alfredian concept of gens Anglorum, this united English kingdom that he's building towards. Æthelwold, you know, he tries to split Wessex in 899, but he does get support from other kingdoms, and maybe that's because these other kingdoms don't want to be subsumed into Wessex. So Ryan Lavell's noted that Edward's strategy in this period is entirely dictated by what Æthelwold is doing. So later on we see Edward and his sister Æthelflaed very much taking the battle to the Vikings, bringing these territories.
He's got the initiative, hasn't he, this Æthelwold child?
Absolutely. It's what Æthelwold is doing that's dictating what Edward is having to do. And it's only the chance of war and battle and Æthelwold being killed at the Holm that Edward is actually able to be secure as king. It's nothing that Edward's really done, and indeed his allies are actually wiped out and defeated.
Yeah.
He's just fortunate that
completely.
fluke of battle Æthelwold is killed.
And actually if he weren't killed, then the Kentish people have been destroyed. They lost that battle, didn't they? God, yeah. He could quite easily then just carried on off to wherever Alfred was. No, Edward was. Golly.
And the impact of Æthelwold's revolt and the validity of his claim to the throne is shown by the remarkably long legacy it has in English royal politics. So Edward later marries the daughter of one of the Kentish leaders that was killed in the battle, Edgiva of Kent.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of historians have suggested that probably there were some ongoing tensions with Kent about how they found themselves abandoned and surrounded and wiped out.
Yeah, so this is him bringing them back into the fold.
So he feels he needs to say thanks for that. But even later than that, Shashi Jayakumar's observed that a division in the 950s between the brothers Edwig and Edgar, like Edgar the Peaceable, has its origins in Æthelwold's revolt. So key supporters on both sides are all descended from people who are on opposite sides of the Battle of the Holm.
Right.
So like Edwig's queen, chroniclers, some of the leading ealdormen, Edgar supporters such as Edgiva, they're on the opposite side. So it's almost like this moment kind of is still 50 years later defining, kind of where you are politically.
Yeah. Wow.
So we've got a very powerful and threatening revolt from Æthelwold.
Yeah.
Against him, obviously, we have to acknowledge, as is always the case, that he is unsuccessful. He doesn't become king. And while he commanded support across England, the notable exception is the one bit that really mattered, which was Wessex. So his rebellion starts in Wessex, and, you know, it looked like we were all set for a great showdown at Wimborne. A very dramatic moment where the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells us that Æthelwold remained in the town with the men that were under him, and had all the gates shut upon him, saying that he would either there live or there die.
Forgetting option 3.
Sir, have you thought about running away to the Vikings? Oh, yes, that's better. Yes, let's do that
one. Yeah.
So his resolve appears a bit less robust than his rhetoric. So he stole away in the night and did a runner. Now, in his defence, he does go directly to the Vikings, spends 2 years raising an army, and then goes back on the offensive. So strategically, it made more sense to withdraw, presumably in face of a force way bigger than what he'd got, than a sort of a suicidal, heroic last stand. But nevertheless, it's a bit disappointing we had that moment. It felt like it was going to be all after that. And also the Chronicle notes that the king ordered them to ride after him, and then he could not be overtaken. So he did thwart Edward's attempt to nip the revolt in the bud by not being captured.
Right, yeah.
Now, obviously, there's the flip side of also the King of Northumbria. Mighty impressive, unless he wasn't actually really kinging. Do the Viking leaders in York bend the knee, pledge their allegiance to him, give him a crown, or is he a stooge? Is it the Last Kingdom interpretation that they think, this guy's an idiot, but we could use him against Edward?
Yeah, but there'd have had to have been... There's no reason for them to just accept him as their king, other than having him as a puppet, unless he defeated them in some way, or had one over them in some way.
I mean, I suppose perhaps there might just be that there is a power vacuum within York. It does seem that there's quite a lot of kings in a short period of time in York. It's almost like you just get powerful people coming to York, and if they're of a certain status and command respect, they might be acknowledged as king. They take some money, they try and raise some troops, and then they head off to wherever it is that they're actually trying to be.
It's like a king pick stop then. Pick up your crown here.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe it's a different thing to be king in York at this point. It's not an expectation that they are going to rule for 30 years and take them all over the country in battle. It's more a case of, I'm a prince and I'm very important. Yeah, okay, probably, yeah.
Yeah, it's that power vacuum that I guess you just turn up with a big enough army. Yeah, they'll do.
And his plan is always going to be to go to Wessex, so it's, you know, he's not going to stay in Northumbria. But, of course, ultimately, the most important thing is Æthelwold is defeated, and for all the difficulties caused Edward, he is killed in the Battle of the Holm. And yet, as we said, technically, his side won the battle, so he doesn't actually lose the Battle of the Holm as such.
He just loses the opportunity to take advantage of it by dying.
He loses his life, but not the battle.
Yeah. Which is the worst way round.
Yes. Yes, he won the battle, but lost the war.
That's disappointing.
And, you know, maybe there should be a certain kudos in the fact that actually he's killed in battle as well. You don't get that very often with the English monarchs. Not many of them killed in battle, but Æthelwold is.
It's tricky, isn't it, to know how good the others are going to be? They're going to lose that final battle because they're nearly monarchs.
Yeah, exactly.
Although this guy didn't.
Yes, but this didn't lose.
Which was confusing, but he did, you know, he didn't lose the battle, so he should have become king, but he did lose his life.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can blame these nearly monarchs for that. It's just like you were saying at the other episode.
You know, if we're going to mark him down at Wimborne for running away instead of dying in a heroic final stand.
Yeah.
It's like, well, now you're marking me down when I did have a battle, so what am I meant to do?
Yeah.
Win? Well, I did win.
Yeah, true. But you're not king. I know. I think I don't know that. What are we scoring out of?
We each score out of 10, and then it...
Okay. Got to think out how to score these. Because that could be a solid 10. Because if ultimately they do always die, you've got to be able to have a 10 in this series.
I guess there will be people who win battles.
Well, this guy.
Well, yeah, win battles and don't die in them.
Yeah.
I guess. So there will be people that have a longer period of time and more opportunities to battle and do better, even if they don't win the battle that makes them king. They maybe do a lot of impressive battling. So I guess you could say we don't have actually a lot of successful battling for Æthelwold, but we do have a lot of successful revolting. So I don't think it needs to be top tier. I think we will get people that are more successful in battle even without becoming king. But equally, I think it's better than many would be able to do.
Yeah. It's difficult. It's really difficult to score. 5 would be really harsh. 10, okay, I take it that would be too much.
If you think of like the Black Prince, for example, you've got battles that he leads and wins against the French.
Yeah. So maybe it's 5 actually. In Battleyness, he literally, there's one battle, he wins but loses.
And you've got the revolt, you've got all of these English kingdoms submitting to him and fighting
Vikings. For him. All right, I started to say 6, I'll stick with 6.
It is tricky when he's the first one, because even though I think he definitely needs to be above 5, but I think he's definitely not anywhere near 10. So I was sort of thinking of a 7, but I'm not sure if that's a little bit on the high side. It's just that question, isn't it? It's which version of Æthelwold is it? Is it the Last Kingdom Æthelwold, or is it actually a real one that's a substantial person and threat, and then Edward propaganda tries to dismiss him?
And even then, if you get to the bottom of that, you've got a losing-winning situation.
I'm going to give him 6.5.
Okay.
I just feel like 7's just a little bit too much, but I'm going to as much as I can. So a 6 from you, a 6.5 from me. It's a pretty good start. A 12.5 for Battleyness.
Scandal.
Well, we've got a pretty good start here as well, because potentially Æthelwold, sex with nuns.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, that's 5 points.
During his initial rebellion within Wessex, he is said to have taken a wife for himself on his way to Wimborne. And this is how the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes the situation in the aftermath of his retreat from Wimborne, because this is where we get the information. They then rode after the wife that Æthelwold had taken without the king's leave, and against the command of the bishops, for she was formerly consecrated a nun.
Just proper nun.
Proper nun. Now, the reason that this is a thing, sex with nuns, rather than just a particularly kinky habit amongst Anglo-Saxon monarchs, because we do see it again, and we will come back to it later in this series as well, we've got a grey area, because you have a lot of lay women, i.e. secular women, who can be educated at a nunnery without actually being a nun.
Right, without saying the magic spell.
Indeed. Or indeed, they can be placed in a nunnery against their will.
Yeah.
So the fact that someone's at a nunnery doesn't necessarily mean that it's a nun.
But the bishop said that she was a consecrated one or something, didn't he?
Well, indeed, yes. Now, under Alfred's law codes, it could be legal to marry a cloistered woman, as he puts it, if there was authorization from the king and the relevant bishop. Which is why the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says it was without the king's permission, without the bishop's permission, because that would be how it would be a legal thing to do. So without any permission, children born of the relationship would be barred from the inheritance. In other words, the emphasis is not so much on it being illegal to marry a nun, but it's rather about controlling the dynastic element. So probably the view is to prevent a marriage alliance that could threaten the king's interest.
Yeah.
So if we put a significant young lady in this nunnery and you go in and marry her, unless I say it's okay, that is not okay, because that could be used against me.
Yeah, it's not the nun bit.
So the fact that the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle emphasises this is without permission, we can probably assume that she is someone of high birth and that the marriage would have been considered against the king's interests. Now, unfortunately, we don't know who she was. John of Worcester suggests a nun of Wimborne, but the historian Alex Wolff has argued that if you pass through Shaftesbury, which is about 20 miles away, it could have been a sister of Edward the Elder, Æthelgiva, so a daughter of Alfred the Great. Now, also technically Æthelwold's cousin.
Yeah.
But these things do happen, and thus that would be a royal match that technically brings in Alfred's line. So if you're trying to kind of bring the Wessex lot together...
Yeah.
And indeed, it's also plausible that she might actually have gone willingly if she was placed in a nunnery to prevent her marrying. Maybe even to prevent her marrying him.
Oh.
You never know. Alfred might have thought this is an alliance perhaps Æthelwold had pursued before.
Yeah, that's why he was very specific about the one he picked up.
Yes.
Golly, yeah, that sounds likely to me. And who was this person? His cousin?
Well, we don't know. So one historian has suggested perhaps it could be his cousin, just because we know that there is a royal princess in an abbey not that far away.
That's definitely right. That's what you're thinking. Well, that's what all of this is about.
Which, you might think of saying, oh, that's a shame, because it felt like it was just going to be sort of just your sex with nuns thing, but actually it's a bit more political. But technically then we could say, well, it's sex with nuns and the nun is potentially his cousin.
Yeah, no, it's fine. No, he's definitely getting the points. And with his cousin, that's going to give it another one. We've got anything else?
Well, you could also look at the fact that he's allying with the Vikings, king of the pagans. Yeah. His uncle, Alfred, had heroically prevented the Viking conquest of England. His cousins and nephews will go on to inflict terminal defeats that will lead to the creation of the English nation. And here we've got Æthelwold trying to bring them back into power just to advance his own interests.
7.
And it's interesting also, there's a great-grandson of Charlemagne, Pepin II of Aquitaine, who's sort of slightly earlier in the century, but similar sort of time. He tried to shore up his position by utilising Viking support and was ultimately accused of abandoning Christianity, effectively turning pagan in order to secure their support. Now, obviously, we've got the propaganda element of calling Æthelwold king of the pagans.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what sort of promises does he make? What are the Vikings expecting to get out of this? If Æthelwold becomes king, are they all just going to line up under him and say, all hail Æthelwold, or has he made promises that he's got to fulfil?
Yeah.
And what are those promises?
Yeah.
On the flip side with the Vikings, they've sort of been kind of a legitimate part of the political establishment for the last 20 years. Alfred makes a deal with Guthrum, the previous king of East Anglia, so they are acknowledged rulers of the Danelaw. Guthrum was baptised and had a Saxon name, so it's not quite the same as just the marauding invaders of earlier decades. So he doesn't necessarily have to have sold his mortal soul in order to gain their support.
But nevertheless, you've got it's pulling. If the aim is this unified country, you've got the one chap, Edward.
Yes.
Who's following Athelstan's aim of pulling it all together. The other guy, in order to sit in that seat, is prepared to go back a generation and make deals with Vikings. So it's pretty rubs. I still think 7.
Yeah, I think a 7 as well. He's ticked a couple of boxes there.
Yeah. Well done. Strong start.
So that's a 14 for Scandal.
Subjectivity.
Now, subjectivity is probably going to be tricky for quite a lot of the nearly monarchs, on account of the fact that they don't actually get to do anything as king or queen. Particularly these early ones where we don't have a lot of evidence to go on anyway. However, we do sort of have an interesting counterfactual for Æthelwold that might count in his favour. While he lacked support in Wessex, he has got submissions and alliances from pretty much all the other English kingdoms.
Right.
And Vikings. So, if he had defeated Edward, what might England have looked like under Æthelwold's rule? King of Wessex, but apparently with strong support in the Danelaw as well. Sarah Foote has speculated he could have created a genuinely Anglo-Scandinavian realm. And James Campbell has suggested that under Æthelwold, England could perhaps have been united much earlier than would ultimately be the case, and with much less bloodshed than would ultimately be required.
Oh, shut me up.
So he even says, had it not been for the chances of battle and of war, Æthelwold might very well have been regarded as one of the greatest figures in our island story.
He would have taken the Alfred crown.
Well, yeah, because ultimately it's Athelstan that becomes the first king of all England.
Yeah.
But that's following decades of Edward the Elder and Æthelflaed fighting all these battles against the Vikings. It's a sort of blitzkrieg campaign that Athelstan himself launches and has to fight. But if Æthelwold has already kind of got the backing of all these other kingdoms, and then he can add Wessex to it, maybe you don't have to do all of that. Maybe Æthelwold just is the one that's able to unite it all, and perhaps it's a bit more Anglo-Scandinavian than just English in the way that Alfred wanted, but maybe a more peaceful and easier route to...
Interesting.
And that would be good.
Yeah, that would be good, but that's hard to give points.
That's the thing, and that's going to be the tricky thing with the series. It's hard to judge on a what if, and
maybe that's what this round is. That's what subject factor is. Subjectivity is the what if.
But I guess again, some of them will have stuff that they do. That's the thing. Some of them will have a bit more stuff, good or bad, that you could judge them on. So you can't just always be like, well, I mean, if it had all worked out like this, and if it had been this version of the way that it worked out, and if he had been this sort of person, then he would have been the best king we ever had.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a lot of
There's a lot of ifs.
Yeah.
The only sort of concrete thing we've got is that he mints some coins. Now, Saxon historians love a coin being minted, so, that's a thing.
Yeah.
That he did. But we don't otherwise obviously have anything, because obviously all we have to go on is the fact that he's fighting a revolt that he loses.
We don't have anything, do we?
We don't really, but yeah, I do think it's an interesting one. It is, if you do think that he genuinely has some backing from these people, then you can see that could have done something different with England, and maybe that would have been a good thing. How likely you think that is?
3.
Yeah, I don't feel like we can give him too much credit. I think it's a really interesting one. I'm not sure it's likely that it would have just been like, right, that's it, we're all England now.
Yeah.
As we said, what promises did he make to all these people? I'm sure the promise wasn't, you can be really well respected within my kingdom of the entire nation.
Yeah.
Probably they would have been tempted to join him because it wasn't.
Yeah, they're opportunists.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to give him a 4 for the counterfactual and the coins, but I think I'd have gone quite high. If I thought that was genuinely on the cards, then I think that'd been quite high, but I think probably not, but it's still intriguing enough.
Yeah.
So 4 for me, 3 from you, 7 for subjectivity.
Nice.
Longevity.
We discussed our sort of slightly altered approach to how I'm making the scores happen for longevity in the introductory episode, but essentially we're looking for how long the nearly monarch. Actually, I don't think I did talk about this bit. This was quite a key thing. I got distracted by talking about the formula.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention this bit. We're looking for how long the nearly monarch is the heir. So in the event of their predeceasing a parent monarch, how long are they the heir for before they die? In the event of somebody who is laying a claim to the throne, for how long does their claim last?
Okay.
So in Æthelwold's case, we can see that as much as he would have claimed that he should be the heir, clearly Alfred had designated Edward as the heir. So for Æthelwold, it's how long does his claim last? So effectively, it's how long is the revolt before he dies. And he is challenging from, we assume, the 26th of October 899, which is the death of Alfred the Great, to the 13th of December 902, which is his own death at the Battle of the Hulme. So that's a total of 3.08 years, which gives him a score of 4.5 out of 20, which puts him 22nd out of 35 for the series as a whole.
Well, he's got to have a weakness somewhere.
Dynasty, not the programme.
For Dynasty, it's the usual in terms of how many legitimate surviving children the subject left behind on their death. But even here, we've got a bit of a question mark for Æthelwold, because we know that his father has descendants in the 10th century. The chronicler Æthelwold and his sister Elfgiva, who marries King Edwig, are said to be descendants of Æthelred I.
Right.
What we don't know is by whom are they descendants of Æthelred I, because he has 2 sons, Æthelhelm that died earlier and Æthelwold. So is Æthelwold the means by which?
Oh, right.
Or is it Æthelhelm? Yeah. And if it's Æthelhelm, then we don't know anything about descendants of Æthelwold. Now, for some reason, generally historians seem to name Æthelhelm as being the person that they're descended from. But I've not seen any reason why he's considered more likely, particularly because I can't find any reference to Æthelhelm having married. Whereas we do know that Æthelwold finds himself a nun to marry.
Oh, yeah.
So I feel that given that we do have a strong suggestion that there are descendants of Æthelred I, and given that we do know that Æthelwold has a wife and we don't have the same
give it him.
Æthelhelm,
Yeah.
benefit of the doubt. Now, I think probably we should only give him credit for one legitimate surviving child, because we don't technically know if he had any, but we're sort of assuming that he probably does.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So we'll assume he has one surviving child, which gives him a score of 6.5 for Dynasty, which is joint 11th for the series.
Okay.
So overall, that gives him a total score of 44.5, which puts him in first place for Series 4 so far.
Well done, that man.
Obviously, He's also in last place of Series 4 because we haven't done anybody else yet, so we can't really say whether or not that's a good score. But, he's done well for Battleyness, done well for Scandal. Not so much Longevity and Dynasty is where he's probably not going to be able to be at the top level. But that's probably a pretty decent score, I think.
Yeah.
That's in the mix. But, of course, it's not all about the score. Does he have that certain something, that lasting legacy, the great achievement, the star quality that we call...
Rex Factor!
There's not much to cling on to with him, is there?
No, he's an interesting starting point for the series because, when you tell the Wessex story from the traditional official perspective, as James Campbell noted, he becomes across as sort of a somewhat odd episode. You don't really think about him much. But actually, he's got a very justifiable claim to the throne. Might be a lot of people that think that he probably is the more senior heir out of him and Edward, and may not have been very far away from success. Ryan Levels argued he's able to successfully utilise both political legitimacy in Wessex and the opportunity externally of Anglo-Scandinavian relations. So, we've got rebellion, Viking alliances, and kingship perishing in a final battle, sex with nuns, but also the defeat and failure to ever become king. But, he packs quite a lot in there for not a lot of information, actually. We've got quite a lot of things to talk about for Æthelwold.
Yeah.
Do you want a poetic quote from... historian Thomas Williams, which I think will apply quite well to a lot of the characters in this series, so I will read it. The Etheling's flame flared brightly, a brief consuming fire. In that flickering red light we can see the dreams of deeds undone, of destiny unfulfilled, of Viking England united by a man thrice begotten of West Saxon kings, trampling the wreckage of his father's realm at the head of a great Anglo-Viking horde. It would not come to pass. Æthelwold's flame would be extinguished in the leaching damp of the East Anglian fens.
Was that a poem?
It's not a poem, I just thought it was quite poetic language.
Oh, right, I see.
For a history book.
Mm.
But, yes, you can, as you said, we can see that how much this could have been a thing and a something. It's a genuine threat, it gets forgotten about, and things could have been very different with him as king. The question is it enough to feel Rexy?
Just doesn't feel Rexy. I spent a lot of that silence then trying to feel it, but no, I can't do it.
Do you think it's just because you looked at the actor's face and thought, oh, I don't like him?
Yeah, and I'm hungry.
I've not got enough eggs to give the Rex Factor at the moment, Graham. It's just...
Yeah, I could do with an egg.
So you're saying a no?
I don't know why I'm saying a no, actually. Because he's got sex with nuns. They're all going to fail at a battle, or that can't be the... I'm going to start it with a yes.
Well, I mean, without wanting to, convince you against it, I guess the reason I feel like you've been feeling like you're going to be a no for the whole episode is that it feels like your instinct is he's a stooge. They don't really.
Yes,
him.
That's right. I do think he's the stooge. Yeah,
and that's the difference. If you think he's a stooge, then. And that's the Lost Kingdom version, then it's not very Rexy. He's just a chancer who runs out of luck.
Yeah.
Whereas if you think that he's actually the real deal and he just is unlucky to die in the battle, then maybe he's got a bit more about him.
And it is possible to be both.
Yeah.
If he was thinking, well, let them think I'm a stooge.
I mean, let's not rule out the chances of this world, Graham. There's a lot to be said about just chancing your luck. And
exactly. Don't do chances down. No.
Ali's going to go no. It's one of those where I just, without doing the whole series yet, I just don't have a feel for it. And by series 3, you feel like you've got a sense of it. But it does feel like a bit of a new beginning in this series because it feels like the judgment's going to be a little bit different. So there is a bit of me that feels like he is a Rexy one because I think actually maybe he does have more substance to him, and I feel like he's been written out by the Wessex propaganda, and actually there's a lot more to him than that. But I'm also aware that as we move along, there'll be ones where there's much more information and they'll have much more star quality, they'll be much Rexier, and thus he might not stand up very well against him. But I'm going to give him the benefit of that. I'm going to say yes. I think that I've had my eyes opened a little bit more to the Wessex propaganda, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle propaganda of Alfred and Edward and this fixed story of England, and actually Æthelwold's just a little alternate version that actually you can see a different history.
Interesting.
But he has to get 2 yeses, so that means that he is a no for the Rex Factor. Though appropriately, in the Consort series, we did the nearly Rexy Consorts. There's a little mini playoff for the Privy Councillors, for the ones where there was a split vote, so they nearly got it. So thus, Æthelwold is the opening episode, and he is the first nearly monarch.
Oh, yeah. Good.
Correspondence Corner.
So that was Æthelwold. Let us know what you thought about him and where you would have fallen on the yes or no line for the Rex Factor. Head to rexfactorpodcast.com for more information and our links on social media. And if you want to support the podcast and get lots more bonus content, then you can go to patreon.com/Rex Factor and sign up to become a Privy Councillor. You get an ad-free version of this podcast, over 450 separate bonus podcasts, and also you can join our Discord server. And one of the bonus podcasts you get is a Privy Chamber, where we have more of my research, more information about Æthelwold and his story that didn't make it into the main episode. So if you want to know a little bit more, then there will be more.
Wicked.
And we have some new Privy Councillors to welcome to the fold.
Adam Crampton, Kate and Brego, PGS Fish, lovely. Anonymous, James Knoop, Kevin Bien, Bid Sadiq, Mark Widowson, Lily, Caroline Brem, Kate Larkins, Alan Graham, Robert Shepherd, Daria, Cara Ward, Bina Gluck, Grace Farley, Caroline Hanley, Alice Gresham, and Alice Keane.
So thank you all very much for signing up and becoming Privy Councillors. Now that is all from us today. So next time it will be a double header, in that we'll be doing 2 subjects in one episode, due to a lack of sufficient information about either one of them, but actually they kind of together make a good combined narrative. So that will be Æthelwold's first cousins once removed, the brothers Elfriard and Edwin.
What is in the next episode?
Mm.
Did they make that list that you did at the start?
They did.
Oh, I don't remember them.
And as we go on, Graham, it's going to get harder and harder for me to remember this list, because I'm going to
You need to have it
just have it pinned up on the wall
yeah,
behind me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, we shall see you next time.